Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm okay. I'm not as stupid as last time.
Less Sudafed?
The drugs have taken
Did your
hold,
lab get busted?
No, I still have a supply, a hoard. But it actually doesn't matter if I'm stupid because I've bought logic offsets.
What's that? Oh, that's like carbon offsets?
Yeah, it's like every time I say something stupid, I've paid money for some blogger somewhere else on the internet to say something smart. In fact, 2 smart things for every stupid thing I say. So I'm covered. I'm logic neutral.
That's a great plan, you know.
My logical footprint is very, very small.
Because it's kind of like liberal but market-oriented, man. That's right where you are. That's great.
Yeah. So this may cost me a lot of money, though, so...
well, I'm not going to comment on that. Depends on what they're charging. I'll say smart things for a pretty low rate if you want.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, there's this and more in it for you. If you offset me. But you do every week.
For you, I would do it for free, Mickey.
You do it for free
yeah,
every week.
exactly. Well, that's our history. Well, this Libby verdict yesterday was a pick-me-up for me, so I'm not in a real bad mood.
Well, he's guilty.
Yep, that was part of my justification for...
I mean, that doesn't mean they proved he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, but he is guilty. There was a reason for his lie. His lie...
Well, that's my question.
His lie got them past the election. I mean, he was worried that they would go after... He was worried that Cheney would somehow be fingered in the disclosure of the CIA employee's identity, and that this would trigger a prosecution under the Intelligence Agents Protection Act. It turned out that was a false worry. This person wasn't covered by the Intelligence Protection Act, but he was worried about it, and so he sort of took the fall himself for Cheney and said, well, I got it from reporters. You know, there was no direct line from Cheney to the leak. I was just passing on what I got from other reporters. And in the course of doing that, he lied, but the election's already taken place and Bush barely won. So,
but wait, when did the indictment came down after the election, right?
But the controversy, the special prosecutor was appointed before the election, and so he.
Well, right. I mean, the special prosecutor was appointed before the grand jury convened, right? He committed the perjury. I don't understand how what he said before the grand jury, which was not going to be disclosed until after the election.
If he told him the truth, Fitzgerald might have gone after Cheney again, and might have indicted Cheney before the election. I think that's the logic of it.
Because if he had said, yes, I told this and this and this reporter, they would have said, and who told you?
Yeah, he testified truthfully that Cheney had told him. He just claims to have forgotten it in between that and the time he told the reporters.
Well, if he testified truthfully, wait a second. If he testified truthfully that Cheney told him, isn't that the thing you're saying he was covering up?
No, he wasn't covering that up. He was completely truthful about how that Cheney told him. He claims that he then forgot it and learned about it again from Tim Russert. And so if he then spread it around, he wasn't spreading around a leak from Cheney. He was spreading around a leak from Tim Russert. It was a completely implausible lie. But it was a lie.
I don't even see how it's a lie that quite gets him off the hook. I don't see how it would keep the prosecutor from looking into Cheney big time. I mean...
It wouldn't, but irrationally in his mind, he would have thought he was protecting Cheney.
Well, in a way... I guess this is the closest thing I've come to a coherent explanation for why he did it. It's been a little mystifying to me because, it wasn't like Clinton's case before, Clinton's perjury case. This was not spontaneous perjury. This was premeditated perjury. He thought about it a real long time. And I had not been able to figure it out because, you would think there were various ways he could admit to having told the reporters without actually incriminating himself.
Well, you and Tom McGuire don't. Tom McGuire also doesn't understand why he would do it.
Well, I'm not sold on yours. I haven't had time to reflect on it, but it's as good as anything I've heard. I mean,
what are the other ways you could have admitted talking to reporters without incriminating himself?
Well, first of all, disclosing per se is not enough. You had to know that she was undercover or something, and you.
Well, right, but if you read the statute carefully, that's true. But A, nobody was really sure what the statute meant, and B, he wasn't sure that he didn't have a crazy prosecutor who was going to start indicting high administration officials. So he decided to be extra cautious and let's assume that the statute applied. Mm-hmm. How can I create another cutout for Cheney?
Do you think his perjury was in any way facilitated by the allegedly neocon doctrine of the noble why? You familiar with that?
I am not familiar with that.
It's claimed, the neocons do have, to some extent, this Straussian, intellectual legacy, right? Leo Strauss, guy at the University of Chicago. It is claimed that Strauss embraced the doctrine of the noble lie, which I guess goes back to Plato. I think there's definitely some reason to believe Strauss was an elitist, and among the doctrines he allegedly embraced was you should lie to the masses for their own. You know better than mere human beings, than the mere human beings who, say, are on a jury, for example. You know better than them what's good for them and what's good for the country and so on. I think, actually, if you try to find Strauss explicitly embracing it, I did a quick Google search. It's not quite that clear. I'll link to the one seemingly fair-minded appraisal, a guy who was in the end agnostic. I do think maybe some Straussians have been more explicit in embracing it.
I'm interested in that because they have denied that, I think, that they believe in this noble lie, because they've always been accused of that.
Yeah, well, I think they have. I think, and it sounds like Strauss himself was not very explicit. On the other hand, I had heard once that he thought that kind of, although, he and they know that there's no God, you shouldn't tell the people. I mean, that is somewhere in the Straussian intellectual legacy, I think.
Well, it's all very consistent certainly with what we've seen of Bill Kristol's mode of operation. But, denying the most explicit example of that is saying that the Shiite-Sunni split has been exaggerated in Iraq before we went in. I can't believe he actually believed that.
Oh, he may have made himself believe it. I thought you were going to mention his alliance with fundamental Christians, fundamentalist Christians.
That would be the obvious one, but I'm not less willing to. I'm just not ready to accuse people of bad faith. On immigration, for example, I think he's acting in good faith. I think he seriously likes immigrants and identifies with the immigrant experience. He's just completely wrong.
Yeah.
But the Sunni Shiite thing just seems anybody who spent time in the Middle East would know better. And now the argument is that they were intentionally creating a Sunni Shiite.
No, it sounds like we're segueing into Iraq, which is probably okay, right?
No, I don't want to do that.
You want to talk more about Libby?
One more thing about Libby. You don't have to rely on the noble lie. Libby was doing nothing more than Poindexter did to protect Reagan. Take the bullet himself. Okay. So and he's taking the bullet.
Yeah.
I was initially worried that the jury was politicized. In other words, the first postings on Drudge said, "Well, we only wish we could have prosecuted Rove for the illegal war in Iraq or something." In an unprecedented move that goes along with, the people taking pictures of Saddam's hanging and blogging everything, a juror has basically published his diary immediately on Huffington Post.
Yeah, I haven't read that. Have you?
It's endless and tedious, but I have read the last half of it, and it does look like they were fairly conscientious.
I believe they were.
Even though they said he has this revealing line about how the biggest celebrity in the courtroom for the jury was Nina Totenberg, which does raise.
Hey, speaking of that,
alarm bells for those of us.
Speaking of that, is she still at NPR?
Yes, she is.
Well, do you know who I discovered this morning was reporting for NPR on the Lewis Libby case?
I don't know.
Libby Lewis. How weird is that?
Libby Lewis on Lewis Libby?
Exactly.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Anyway, even if they were a bunch of NPR listeners, they do seem to have been conscientious. So, I think this diary sort of allayed my fears that it was just like, we hate the Iraq War, so we're going to convict Scooter Libby. And since it was the right verdict, I can't really argue with it.
Yeah.
That's what I have to say about that.
I got to admit, I had a brief moment of sympathy. I mean, I like to think that I'm enlightened enough to feel sorry when anyone suffers, even if their suffering is in the public good, as I believe it is in this case. Because I actually do seriously believe whenever you have a high-profile case of perjury, I mean, perjury is not routinely prosecuted, but whenever you have a high-profile case of it, once everyone knows someone has committed perjury, I do think it's important that the person be found guilty for the integrity of the legal system. I think that's the message that needs to be sent. But I got to say, I looked at this picture of Libby in the New York Times, and I kind of briefly felt sorry for him because it seemed... it seemed like such a pathetic attempt at stoicism, and he seemed so clearly to be kind of suffering. But then I turned over the fold and saw this picture of in Baghdad of a mother and son walking past the remains of a suicide bomber in the former vehicle occupied by the suicide bomber. And I thought, you know, I guess if you got to punish somebody, it's not a totally bad thing if it's somebody associated with the Cheney-Libby apparatus that did so much to get us into the Iraq War. And that's my masterful transition to what we're going to talk about now, Mickey.
That was masterful.
Thank you.
Think
it was totally unplanned, by the way.
The other thing is,
totally spontaneous.
Do you think he's going to spend a day in jail for this?
Well, if the appeals fail, yeah, I don't know.
I don't think so. I think they'll pardon him before he spends it.
Oh, you think that Bush will pardon him while Bush is president?
I think he'll be able to drag out the appeals until a moment when Bush feels
it'll have to be at the very end. I think there's essentially no way it happens while Bush has more than 2 hours left on his watch, and even then, I think he may be concerned about legacy. But Bush is way too weak politically right now to mess around with that.
And it's a very good point that if it comes 2 weeks before the election, it could tip it against it. So he's sort of either going to do it now or at the very end.
He's not going to do it now.
Okay, thank you for that assurance.
I would give you about 50 to 1 odds on that.
Okay, you segued masterfully to Iraq.
To Iraq. Well, did you wanted to give a pro-surge thing, or what?
No, the surge is finally getting good press. I don't know if...
Well, that's usually a bad sign when something finally starts getting good press.
I agree, but it is getting good. I mean, Brian Williams on NBC had a fair account. I mean, people seem to agree that it is at least temporarily, at least half pacified Baghdad. Now, nobody knows if that's going to be permanent, if these guys that have faded into the woodwork are going to come back, and also nobody knows quite what happens next. Those two problems still exist. It looked, according to Brian Williams' account, it looked as if we're still going for the whole enchilada, which is we really think that if we give them a taste of peace, they will not allow the sectarian gunmen back in, and people can actually move back to their homes in mixed neighborhoods, and that'll be some sort of permanent political settlement. I'm with Samantha Power in the L.A. Times. I would much rather go for the more attainable half loaf of aiding partition and resettling people in ethnically homogeneous neighborhoods where they'll at least temporarily be safe. That's what Samantha Power, who is an advisor to Obama and should have revealed that she's an advisor to Obama, said in the L.A. Times.
Oh, is she an advisor to Obama?
Yeah, and there's a little bit of politics in this piece too, because she keeps going on and on about how Obama's plan is completely compatible with her plan, and it's she calls for setting a deadline.
It's funny. I saw that and I thought just she's sucking up because she wants to be part of the Obama campaign.
No, I think she is.
But I was way behind the story on that.
She's always cited as a key Obama advisor, and that's fine.
Well, she's not on the payroll. I'm not sure she's obliged to disclose. It could just be an informal relationship, like yours with Ann Coulter. But wait, we'll come to that later.
Well, I think it's more formal than my relationship with Ann Coulter.
Well,
because I mean, he's let stories go out about how she's on his brain trust, etc., etc. She may advise other people. It's true.
Yeah.
But I would like to know, because this whole, the piece was basically right, but it was 4/5 positioning.
Well, anyway, here's why I would be a little, I think praise of the surge may be a little premature. I mean, who knows? I had anticipated that it would have an initially pacifying effect just solely on the say-so of John Burns, who was so confident that would happen, that I figured he was right. But, last week you said something that I kind of pondered afterwards, and this leads to my concern. You said, well, the really evil killing has been stopped or greatly subdued by the surge, and that is these militia killings. Yes, the bombings are going on, but the really evil killings are the militia killings. And I kind of didn't quite get why one form of murder of innocents was
well,
more...
I guess because the bombing is designed to provoke the militia killings, and if
right. But here's the deal.
And if you stop the militia killings, then you've stopped the cycle of...
No, but here's why that's not true. I think. First of all, imagine the situation that presumably, I think, I would hypothesize more or less prevails in Sadr City, okay? Muqtada al-Sadr got his militia to stand down, okay? These guys took off their black uniforms, and their guns are in their houses, and they're laying low for now. It's basically it's not like our army prevailed over them. It was basically a negotiated deal that they could go into Sadr City, right? Now, these young guys in black, are guys for whom the Iraq War brought a really significant elevation of status, right? They were really feeling their oats. They were suddenly the source of authority. They were the new police. They were walking around in their black stuff, and they had the guns, and they were looked at with fear and respect and so on.
Concede that, yeah.
Okay. Now, so they are actually not happy about the presence of many of them, I would suspect, are not happy that now it's the Americans with the guns who people are looking at with fear and respect, okay? And now there are people in the neighborhood who I think are happy, and I think I've seen this reported. I mean, if you look back to when these young guys got this status elevation, guys my age with kids were probably not happy about this because they had learned how to survive in Saddam Hussein's regime. You just don't talk about politics, you don't criticize the government, and things work fine, and the police keep order, and you can raise your family. Then these young guys, many of them thugs, are running around with guns. You're not happy about that. So those guys I think there is a constituency that's happy about the American presence in Sadr City. But these young guys in black, they are looking for an excuse to argue that the Americans are not doing the job, okay? And as long as these bombings continue, such as the one of which I showed you a picture not long ago, that's their ammunition. That's what they want. If we can't stop the bombings, then the people who want to argue that the militia can keep the Shiites safer than the American army can are going to prevail. And so it's just not enough to just stop the militia killings, because then you've created a situation where it's just Sunnis killing Shiites. That's not a stable situation.
The Mahdi army didn't stop the bombings either.
That's true.
Exacted revenge.
That's true. But what I would say is there has to be an appreciable, discernible reduction in the bombings because of the dynamic I described.
Well, I guess here's the counter argument. You may be right. Suppose the bombings continued at the same pace they are, but they're regarded as the acts of Al-Qaeda terrorists who everybody hates, and they know everybody's trying to reduce them as much as possible, but but the sort of society is united that this is a bad thing, as would happen if there were bombings, say, in this country. If there were that situation, even if there was no reduction in these horrible bombings, that would be a better situation. Now, I don't...
Fine, but that's not... But for example, if the bombings continue, the guys I'm talking about are going to be saying things like, I heard that the Americans are actually giving information to these bombers. In this kind of situation, those kind of rumors spread, and you got a major source of those kinds of rumors.
According to Iraq, the model, they're already spreading similar lies about how we're tying up Shiites and leaving them in Sunni neighborhoods to be killed.
That's precisely because there is a constituency I described that wants the American troops out. And if there's a big constituency like that in the Shiite community, we are going to have to clearly subdue the Sunni violence in order for this to work. It's not going to be enough for things just not to get worse.
No, I guess I agree with that. I was thinking that there's been bombing forever and ever in Iraq, but things really got bad when the Shiites decided to seek revenge for these bombings. And if we can get back to the situation we had before, where They were just being haplessly slaughtered by bombs and not seeking revenge and holding their fire because they'd achieved a measure of political power and wealth and opportunity that they'd never had before, and they didn't want to jeopardize it. That would be a good thing.
The other thing I'd say is these guys, who formerly wore black and are for now staying quiet, they're in a position. If once the American forces start getting discredited and there's a groundswell of people who want them out, they're definitely in a position to cause trouble for the Americans and kill a few Americans. And it's not going to take a whole lot of bad publicity about American setbacks in Baghdad for the surge to become very hard to sustain politically here in America. I mean, this is going to be the Tet Offensive all over again. In other words, it's not going to really matter so much what the actual strategic story is on the ground. If the publicity is very bad, it's going to be hard to sustain.
That's a huge danger. The press is, you kill 18 Americans, the press is willing to declare the surge a failure.
But the other thing is that with an urban insurgency or this kind of urban combat environment, if there's many people who do want to give the Americans trouble, it isn't going to just be a matter of perception. It probably is going to be hard for the Americans to prevail, in other words, because they're in an environment where fighting back tends to mean killing innocents, and that tends to inflame their opponents and so on.
I mean, the one thing I'm not clear on is there Sunni militia killing of Shiites in mixed neighborhoods independent of the bombing? I think there is.
I believe there is some of that, but I think the bombing is the main weapon.
If we can stop that, too, it's not like we haven't done the Shiites any favors.
Well, if we can even push the bombings out clearly beyond the zone that we purport to be focusing on intensively, I think that would be a success of sorts. And sometimes you do hear, some of the bombings you hear about, they're kind of north of Baghdad or whatever, but I know this bombing a few days ago of this booksellers area, the Washington Post story on that had these quotes in it. Somebody saying, one of the residents saying, "What security plan?" There is no security plan. Somebody whose car had just been blown up.
Right.
So,
we'll see. You would say that too if your car was just blown up.
It depends on which car. You've seen my car, and you know that would not be a great loss.
The reasons you cite are the reasons why I would rather we went the Samantha Power, David Brooks route and, set the stage for partition rather than attempting to I think the strategy is to bring peace to Baghdad so when the Mahdi army tries to come back, people turn them in. As you say, their status depends on them being the police, and they're not really going to want to be turned in. The one possibility I can think of is that they are the police. In other words, they can get status as the police defending the government, or at night they can get status as the Mahdi army, ethnic cleansers.
Well, it probably would be smart to try to transition a lot of those guys into the official police force. You're right.
Well, they're already there, I think. Isn't
the decommissioned Mahdi army guys, or
No, but there are a lot of Mahdi army people who are affiliated with the Mahdi army, maybe not by day, who are in the police, and they can get their status by being in the police.
I'm not sure they're the same guys. There's a lot of Shiite militia infiltration of the police force. I don't know
Those
exactly.
are the people I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But maybe they're not the guys wearing the black clothing in the day.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, but I really don't know.
Anyway, the ex-soldier who's a friend of mine who was so against the surge has now been so impressed by Petraeus' strategy that he thinks it might work. He agrees. What happens afterwards, and it might be that what happens in a year. Okay, we brought peace to Baghdad for a year. Suppose we reduce the bombing somewhat. We bring peace to Baghdad, and we managed to avoid getting enough of our people killed to make it untenable.
Mm-hmm.
In a year, Bush will go to the country and say we got to stay there for another year. And maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing. But the idea that the sort of idea I heard from this neocon friend that this is the prelude for a withdrawal, I don't quite see how that works.
I say time will tell, Mickey.
That's very exciting of you.
Thank you. That's one of your offsets, what I just said. What are they called?
Well, you have to buy the offset.
What kind of offsets are they?
It's a logic offset.
A logic offset.
But that was a pathetic punditry offset. You have to...
You have to do better. I have to say something more incisive than that?
You have to pay for somebody to take a clear, incisive opinion somewhere else.
Okay, buy low, sell high. How's that? This is kind of a natural transition to this Gore thing, right?
Right. A guy named Eli Lake, who reports for the New York Sun, which I think is a pretty neoconservative...
Mickey, a guy who was recently on Blogging Heads TV. Okay, would you check out the site every once in a while when you're not on it? I mean...
I saw him. He's a Blogging Heads star, a fellow Blogging Heads colleague named Eli Lake. Pointed out that Gore has not joined the calls for a pullout, and it's worse. It's more than that. In his original statement of opposition to the war, where he sort of came out against the war, he said he worried that Bush would go in and then pull out and leave a mess. So he didn't say he was worried that we'd endlessly be there, occupying it. He said he was worried that we wouldn't have the staying power. And in fact, something Eli Lake missed in an interview on, I think, with Matt Lauer in the middle of last summer, he basically rejected the idea of a deadline, too. He thought that would be a bad idea. We'd just give the bad guys, exactly the same as Bush, it would give the bad guys reason to just wait around for us to leave. So it's not at all clear that Gore, the hero of the left, is on board with the left's, chosen solution, which is a deadline and a pullout.
Oh, it's not the unanimous chosen solution of the left. It's something that the presidential candidates generally seem to think is the smart thing to say.
Yeah, because they want to appease the left.
I'm not so sure it is the smart thing to say, even politically, but that's all it is. I mean, I don't see a logical contradiction between Bush saying he worried that there would be, we would create a mess, withdraw, and leave a mess. The contradiction being that on the one hand, and now him not saying anything in particular. I don't see a contradiction.
The contradiction is that Gore doesn't want to pull out and Obama does.
Well, but he hasn't said he doesn't want to pull out.
But he's pointedly not saying he does want to pull out, and he said he didn't want a deadline in the middle of last summer. Deadline was a deadline for a pullout.
So are we trying to indict Gore here, or what? What is the problem?
The problem is that Gore is not towing the same line that the other Democratic candidates are.
Well, what's wrong with that?
I admire Gore for that. It's just interesting to point it out.
Oh, okay. So you're happy with him.
Yes, but it means that Gore isn't engaging in the wishful thinking that these Democrats are, we pull out and there's not going to be genocide. As Samantha Power points out, there may well be genocide.
Well, she also says that there's enough flexibility in Obama's position to... But I don't think the kind of flexibility in Obama's position is necessarily especially potent. I mean, his is of the if the Iraqis meet these benchmarks and so on, we'll do Y. I mean, there is no the Iraqis anymore. The idea that you set this incentive structure up and say, well, if they will do this and this and this and this, there is no they. It's in the middle of a civil war. And
well, plus they've all opposed the surge, which is the only thing that's giving us leverage.
Yeah, so, I mean, as I've told you, I thought Obama should not have rushed to join the withdrawal crowd. I thought he was positioned to be the guy who, on the one hand, had the foresight to oppose the war, but the guy who, on the other, was not going to be pressured by politics into a premature judgment.
I agree, and on this and on the...
I mean, I think having opposed the war gave him such solid credentials on the left that he didn't need to do this Me Too-ism with Hillary on withdrawal.
Absolutely. Very, very, very good point, and he's done the same thing with big labor, which we'll get to later, where he's knuckled under them when he didn't have to.
But so you're not criticizing Gore. I mean, I assume I got to admit I did not carefully read the Eli Lake column, even though it was sent to me personally in my email.
Sorry?
I said it was sent to me personally in an email, and yet I failed to read it closely. I assumed it was anti-Gore, but you're not taking it that way?
Well, no, it's in the neocon Sun. They're saying he's a neocon like us. They're praising Gore. It's driving a wedge between Gore and the so-called Democratic base, which is, and it's sort of poisoning the well with him with the peacenik Iowa caucuses. But it's not an
But if they like him, they should want him to get nominated. And anyway.
Well, but he's a reporter. He's going to tell what he thinks is the truth. It was an interesting point.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't heard it.
don't piss on your fellow
blogging head. I don't. Why do you think I recruited him? I'm recruiting the most incisive commentators in America.
You have to. These are fragile egos. You have to tend us carefully. Anyway, it's an interesting point. I mean, the point is that these left people may elect Gore, and then they'll be disappointed when we're still in Iraq 4 years into the Gore presidency. That's an interesting point to make.
It is.
But it makes me like Gore more because I think the left is engaged in wishful thinking. The other point one more point about Samantha Power, which is, she says we want to help relocation. Well, that's fine. I agree with that. And then it talks about how we have to, if we're serious about preventing further sectarian horrors, we must send a clear sign to the militias and political leaders that they'll be brought to justice for their crimes. Well, Jesus, we can't even. I mean, doesn't that imply a sort of more sophisticated level of order than we've been able to achieve? I mean,
well, it gets back to the point I made about this idea that these guys are like, rats in a maze, and we're giving them food pellets and stuff. I mean, I kind of agree that people are overestimating the extent to which we have a very clear-cut, kind of incentive system over in Iraq right now.
I mean, the idea that we can't stop them from killing. Oh, but one day they may be brought before the Hague. Well, that'll stop them.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, silly.
Well, I think she was. I assumed she was thinking more in a futuristic way. This is the kind of thing that creates the need for this kind of institution.
Well, she may have been thinking that Maliki would worry that what happened to Milosevic would happen to him. I guess that would be the argument.
Yeah.
But everybody under Maliki's not going to worry about it.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Now we have to talk about this Ann Coulter thing, I guess.
I guess it's on my mind.
Well, the Ann Coulter thing is always on your mind, Mickey.
I resent that implication.
What implication?
Never mind. So, I mean, she said what she says has been incredibly about, making this joke that I think she thought was a joke about, Isaiah Washington got into trouble. You have to go to rehab in Hollywood for using the word faggot, and so she can't talk about John Edwards. I think faggot is an offensive word. You shouldn't use.
First of all, are you so naive as to think she was just making a joke as opposed to trying to get another round of rabid attention? I mean, this is her whole M.O., and she's addicted to it. You really think she didn't think, hey, maybe the liberals will go wild? You think that, Mickey?
I think she tosses out a bunch of things like that. She tries to push the envelope.
I don't think she's so stupid.
I don't think she knows which one the liberals are going to go wild.
Oh, no. She had no clue.
But I do think, I do think she genuinely doesn't understand, and maybe it's a self-interested self-delusion on her part. She genuinely does not understand how offensive that word is.
Oh, I think that's kind of crazy.
She's not a hate-filled person, and it was not said in a hateful way. It is a hateful word.
Well, in my mind, the picture is a lot larger than that. She is smart enough to know the resonance that the word has. She is smart enough to know that so long as that word can be acceptably used in polite company, it will abet people who are actually bigots and harass homosexuals and sometimes physically assault them. She's smart enough to know all that, Mickey.
Have you read my blog where Andrew Sullivan made exactly Coulter's argument in 2001 that the word has sort of been diluted and it's not as bad as it was? And I don't buy that, but I mean there are people who are certainly not hostile to gays who have bought the line that we should all be looser and not so uptight. And
I kind of glanced at that item, but what I saw him saying was that these days, among some young people, right, in some circles, it is you. First of all, this was his opinion, 5, 6, 7 years ago. Okay, times change, opinions change. But what I took him to be saying was, in some circles now, it does not have the resonance it used to have, and I think he explicitly mentioned young people, right? Now, Ann Coulter knew who she was talking to. The meaning of a message has to do, the intended meaning of the message is shaped by your audience to the extent that you understand what your audience is. She knew damn well what her audience was. She knew damn well that she was talking to a lot of people, many of whom considered it a pejorative term. And that's the way she used it, Mickey.
First, she was explicit earlier in this piece that she was not against homosexuality.
What does that matter?
Just against gay marriage. Because she wasn't appealing to bigotry. She was
totally appealing to bigotry.
She was making a joke. I don't think she was appealing to bigotry.
The whole idea of the joke is that the term is pejorative. The whole presupposition of that supposed joke, and by the way, people applauded. They didn't just laugh. They applauded.
She's mocking Hollywood for sending somebody to rehab for using a word that she doesn't think you should be sent to rehab for, and she meant that Edwards was a wuss. She does not actually think that Edwards is gay. She's made that completely
Mickey,
clear.
of course, that's not the point. I mean, I noticed in your little blog, you said, now, what do I think of Coulter's comment? A, she obviously wasn't saying Edwards is gay. B, she equally obviously doesn't think Edwards... Mickey, none of that is the point. In fact, the fact that she knows he isn't gay is the point. She was sheerly using what she knew would be understood as pejorative. Here's the thing. I mean, the question is, do you want to sustain the idea that this is a pejorative? Because to the extent that you do that, you actually are abetting the persecution of gay people. And the whole premise of her joke is that it's a pejorative. Let me put it to you this way, Mickey. You remember there was a time when black people were more likely than today, I think, to be persecuted, harassed, discriminated against, right?
Right.
Okay. And you know that in the case of homosexuals, I think there's also a favorable trend in that direction, but it is still the case that right now in high schools across America, there are homosexuals who are either being harassed, maybe even physically assaulted, or their identity is secret and they live in fear that it will be disclosed because then they will be harassed or maybe physically assaulted. You agree with all that, right?
Right.
And in that sense, the gay rights thing is running behind the civil rights thing per se a little bit, right?
Right.
Progress on that front.
We can have an argument on whether it'll ever catch up.
Well, we can, but my main question is, do you agree that an important part of the progress in the case of civil rights was when the day came when you could not use the N-word in polite company?
Right. I don't think she should use this word.
Oh, you don't?
No, I wrote that in the paragraph you cited.
And are you treating her the way you treat people who use the N-word, Mickey?
No, I don't think it's as bad as the N-word.
Oh, why is that? Because it's not as bad to beat up a gay person as it is to beat up a black person?
No, because it's not. You're not saying that somebody is somehow an inferior species of human, and an inferior citizen and a second-class citizen. When you say that, you're ascribing, it takes on an independent meaning of
what, superiority and privilege?
But look, I can point you to a gay blog where they said this is an offensive word, it's just like the N-word, and a reader wrote in and said, how come you don't print the N-word, but you're happy to print faggot?
That's exactly my point, Mickey. We haven't made as much progress. The day should come when people don't pronounce this word. As you know, I made the exact same argument about what I will now call the R word that she applied to Muslims, which, by the way, apparently I learned she applied in the same forum at CPAC. I mean, she knows her audience.
I think that was the instance where she said it. It was at CPAC last year.
That's my point. But anyway, that's what I'm saying. That's exactly my point, Mickey. And you have a choice as far as whether you choose to distance yourself from her or not. Which is, do you want to sustain the progress that's being made that makes gay people in high schools less vulnerable to harassment and assault, or do you want to wash your hands of the affair?
I don't think she should use the word. I don't think anybody should use the word except in certain contexts where you're obviously, not using it as a word of opprobrium.
Yeah, but
so
why is this less important?
All I'm saying is that that she thinks that was not a hateful word directed at homosexuals. You can argue that she should have thought that. That it seems to me that's a fair argument.
You think
All
she
I'm saying
really?
is I'm arguing,
you think she really didn't think that people in that audience, that a sizable number of people in that audience, would construe it that way?
I think she thought they would laugh and move on. Yes.
Why would they laugh? They could only laugh if they thought that the F word was a pejorative.
She's saying that they would laugh for two reasons, and it was a bad joke. Okay, they would laugh for two reasons. One, laughing at Hollywood rehab, people in Hollywood having a PC code where they can't say certain words, and two, they would laugh at Edwards's flighty. Sort of dancing around like a little elf and being wussy on foreign policy.
Well, I still haven't heard from you. I thought you agreed that basically we have a parallel dynamic here between earlier progress in civil rights and progress in gay rights. I haven't heard from you why you think it's less important to do the things that would protect gay people than it is to do the things that would protect blacks.
Well, there are a whole bunch of reasons I should think about that, but it seems to me the oppression of gays is not as bad as the oppression of blacks. Here's an example. At the Washington Monthly, okay, I'm confessing something here. The Washington Monthly we used to call people in the State Department and civil servants fags. Okay, why do we call them fags? Not because we thought they were homosexuals, but because we thought they were wusses. They had the qualities that were traditionally associated pejoratively, falsely, with stereotypically by bigots with homosexuals.
I'm sure the N-word was used that way. I'm sure.
No, it was. I can't conceive of using the N-word.
I'm sure people said to each other, you're eating that food like an N, or you're dressed like an N. I'm sure that was said.
What were the qualities that were associated with Eds, other than being inferior and animalistic and somehow unsophisticated and not smart? I mean, I can't conceive of using the N-word like that.
It sounds like a nut, first of all. I mean, what do you mean?
Well, but anyway, it just doesn't. The people of the Washington Monthly used that word. We're not bigots. We're not anti-gay. Blah 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 blah. It was just used as there is such a thing as being a wuss. Okay, and it was just a way to.
I'm not saying
people really have the bad.
I'm not saying we shouldn't be allowed to use words like weakling or whatever. Fine, the meaning can live on, but the point is this particular formulation sustains actual bigotry, and I think to the extent that you continue to be increasingly like the only person in the world who hasn't disassociated himself from Ann Coulter. I mean, more and more, a paper in Pennsylvania dropped her column over this, like this blog, Captain's Quarter, wrote this very intelligent letter, conservative blog. I mean, who is on board with her besides you? Really, name a person. Name one person, Mickey.
It's very easy to join. It's very easy for people, and it's in everybody's self-interest to condemn Ann Coulter. And it would be in my self-interest to condemn Ann Coulter. I'm a friend of hers. I know her. There's not a homophobic bone in her body. She's not a homophobe.
That's not even strictly speaking.
Yes, they are. If you read James Wolcott and Andrew, they're all saying, "Oh, she and Mickey both hate gays," and blah 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 blah. And this is hate speech. It wasn't hate speech. It's a word that shouldn't be used for the reasons you say.
No, but the point.
I also resist. Let me talk. I resist this. How everything has to be elevated to the N-word. Everything has to be locked into the civil rights paradigm where you can't use the N-word, you can't use this word, you can't use this word, you can't use this word. They're all exactly the same. So we end up taking a whole bunch of words out of discourse because they somehow fit into this on-off black-white civil rights paradigm. And life is more complicated than that.
Well, if you were like a gay kid at a high school who was scared of getting beat up after school, I suspect you'd see it differently. And the ability to put yourself in the shoes of someone other than you is what finally gave the civil rights movement critical mass.
Of course, Andrew defended the use of the F word, specifically in the schoolyard context. But look, I agree. I had my eyes open. I used the word once in my one of my best friends who's gay was wildly offended, and that opened my eyes.
Well, I'll bet he's offended by your defending her. And the question is not whether she's homophobic, because anybody who exploits bigotry in using, this kind of vocabulary, anybody who was not racist but used the N-word to curry favor with a racist crowd, I would say deserves to be stigmatized and ostracized just as much as somebody who used it in a more conventionally hateful way.
I'm not sure it was such a homophobic crowd.
I think the people who applauded Mickey, what do you think about those people who applauded? What was driving them?
Half of them were
affection for gay people?
Half of them, resistance to PC, to PC exclusion of an increasing number of words from the acceptable vocabulary. The Bob Wright world is not a very pleasant world to be in.
What's it like? What's the Bob Wright world like,
Bob
Mickey?
Wright world, you're constantly walking on eggshells.
Oh, yeah.
Giving offense to some person. You can never say in public what you say in private.
Yeah.
An increasing number of words are removed from public discourse.
What are some of those words?
Raghead, you can't...
That's right. So you're in favor of the use of that word to describe Muslims, Mickey?
You can't... I didn't say I was in favor of it. I'm just saying that we shouldn't constantly be removing,
Well, then why the N-word?
You can't do a cartoon about Muhammad. You can't say that...
I didn't say you can't do it, Mickey. Why not the N-word? So you think a slur directed at Muslims and gays is fine? No, Mickey, let's be clear here. You're saying we should not stigmatize slurs against Muslims and gay people, but we should against blacks. Is that right? Or are you saying we should not stigmatize use of the N-word? Which is it?
I'm saying that there's not everything is black and white.
No, I'm sorry, but I think really logic dictates that you tell us which of those two positions is yours.
Why does logic dictate as I?
Because it's got to be one or the other, given what you said.
Why does it have to be on-off? There could be shades of gray. That's my point.
Wait. Let's look at how many alternatives there are here for you. Okay. I mean, are you saying you're against stigmatizing slurs against these particular slurs against Muslims and gay people, right?
No, I don't think you should say them.
No, but you're against stigmatizing them. Because if you stigmatize them, you're in the Bob Wright world.
I'm saying there are varieties of stigma.
You're against stigmatizing them, or you're for it?
I think you are trying to say that there's either stigma or no stigma, and I'm saying that there's half stigma.
There is a binary quality to this particular thing.
Why is there a binary? There's only a binary quality when you, the Savonarola of words, are insisting on a binary quality.
No, I'm saying the stigma against the N-word is binary, which is to say, if somebody uses it, you do not invite them to your dinner party, and it's that simple, and that's the way it works, and I think it works well. Now, if you're saying the rules should be different for Muslims and gay people, then say it. But are you saying it or not?
I'm saying that the F word, not that the rules should be different, but that the F word is not as vicious a word because it does not imply that you are ineradicably an inferior human being, and in fact, it's a word that, anyway, that I'm saying it's not as bad. If there were a word that said, gay people are sinners and they're just going to hell and they're irrevocably evil people, I don't think the F word is that word. It's a bad word, but I don't think it's as bad as that.
Well, there's no intrinsic quality of that sort with the N-word. And, in fact, it was used in a variety of ways, too, once.
Well, we've had this argument, and certainly Senator Byrd has used it that way. I agree. But all I'm saying is that there's a spectrum, and you're trying to deny a spectrum and employ an on-off test.
No, I'm just asking. I mean, you agree that in some cases a binary kind of stigma makes sense, namely the N-word. I think you agree with that, and that's my only question.
No, I'm saying that in some sense, the strongest stigma applies. Yes. And if Ann Coulter used that word, I wouldn't be her friend. If she used the F word in a way that implied that she thought homosexuals were, a substandard person of, substandard.
But I mean, you realize, Mickey, the N-word.
I wouldn't associate with it, but she doesn't.
But Mickey, the N-word has no intrinsic, denotative, kind of meaning. It just is a pejorative directed toward an ethnic group, and that's exactly what it has in common with the R word. as directed toward Muslims. And so I really don't get your differing approaches to this. It's really hard to come up with a totally charitable interpretation, except that you're extremely loyal to a friend who happens to be an evil witch.
We had the R-word debate, and I pointed to the military manual where it said it's okay to call Muslims the R-word, and then there were some other words that it was not okay to call.
Well, that was once said about the N-word.
Because it refers to an item of clothing, not to a intrinsic quality of the human being.
Defenses like that were once made about the N-word, but moral progress marches on.
It's like calling Koreans garlic eaters. They do eat garlic, or whatever they eat.
The original denotative meaning of these things has nothing to do with it, Mickey. I believe the N-word began as a Southern pronunciation of the word Negro. That doesn't matter.
Well, it makes it worse if it's just an abstraction, sure. Because it's not referring to any particular qualities.
Just out of curiosity, what is... I mean, you see, I can see your position to the extent that you were like fast and deep friends with Ann Coulter long before it became apparent that she is an evil witch. But is that the deal? I honestly don't know. What is the history?
I don't think she's an evil witch.
Before she started using, the R word and blah, 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 and saying we should invade countries and kill their leaders and forcibly convert all Muslims to Christianity.
Oh, I certainly knew Ann Coulter and was friends with her before she was Ann Coulter. So did all the,
Before she was Ann Coulter?
I mean, you know what I mean. Before she became the phenomenon of Ann Coulter. When she was just a little-known constitutional researcher hanging around Washington.
Well,
I did know her then. I wasn't very close to her, but I was friendly with her.
That may partly vindicate you, but...
God, I'll settle for partial vindication at this point.
I am not the one who will judge your fate in the hereafter.
No, that'll be Andrew Sullivan.
Do we have to get into the labor thing?
We don't.
Well, what I would say about this is it's been done to death on blogging heads and actually done very well. The last couple of few dialogues have extended discussions of the card check issue. You would not know that since, of course, you only look at the site when you're on it, but trust me, they were good.
Why don't you refer me to a couple of them, and I'll go look at them, and then we'll
get back to it?
Then we'll get back to it, yes. Which ones would you recommend to our viewers?
Actually, the last three, Henry Farrell and Will, two of them ago, Megan and Matt immediately preceding us. And I guess Ezra and Byron, they got into it. And also, Oh Come On wrote into us, I am so tired of this debate. None of the bloggers are making any new arguments. Is Mickey Kaus suddenly in charge of all the topics? This because it's a labor-related issue. Actually, I think I learned something new from every one. I think they're all really good. But
what did you learn?
Well, I mean, for example, I had never... It was not initially clear to me, like, wait a second, what can be better than a secret voting? I mean, we should say, I mean, if anybody doesn't know, Labor wants to get this thing through Congress, although the other thing, Oh Come On notes is it's never going to get past the Senate, so how much time should you spend on it? Labor wants to get this thing where all you would need for unionization is for the union to privately gather support, for the union organizers to privately gather support for the union, then bring them to the attention of the company, and at that point, they've kind of won already. If a majority of the workers want a union and they present this fact to the company, there will be a union. That's more or less true, right?
Why is that fairer than a secret ballot?
Well, what I had wondered is what forms of intimidation do employers allegedly use if there is this long interim when you're like discussing the fact of that you're going to have an election, blah, 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 blah. And the fact is, I learned from Henry Farrell and in his dialogue that what Walmart does is they say, if they have the opportunity, look, if you vote for this, we will shut down the store. And I think even they've done it once, and for demonstration effect. I'm not sure about that, but that I learned.
They did that once, and they claim it was a coincidence. I think.
Funny how that happens. The other thing,
I don't quite understand why an employer shouldn't be able to shut down a firm if he doesn't like what's happening. He can shut down a firm because his wife wants him to move to Hawaii. I mean, why can't he shut down a firm because he doesn't want to deal with a union? Life's too short. This is considered some horrible no-no under our labor laws, and I don't quite understand why it's a horrible no-no. It seems to be General Motors is perfectly, or some, Toyota's should be perfectly able to say, look, if you unionize, we're going to make our cars in Japan. We don't want to deal with the union.
Well, I don't think that's really the issue here, strictly speaking. I mean, you're talking totally about another aspect of labor law. But the other thing, I mean, that came through in via Matt Iglesias, which I had actually seen in a good Kevin Drum item, was that, and this actually speaks to the post you did on this, which is that, you say that, well, the problem is unionization hurts the competitiveness of workers. The point made, I'm sure you've heard this, was that a lot of workers are now in industries that do not compete with foreign workers because they're service industries.
I guess I didn't quite understand that. If Toyota has janitors to clean its plants, and it has to use local janitors, and the janitors cost $20 an hour instead of $10 an hour, that reduces the competitiveness of that American industry.
Well, yeah, but you take something like
even though those are workers, you can't outsource those jobs, but. And also if even if it doesn't hobble industries that are in international competition that depend on these local services, it makes us all poorer if local services are less efficient. So if
well, that's a separate argument. I mean, look, you're
right.
I don't
understand why he's implying that there's no problem with unions destroying competitiveness because this work can't go anywhere. And I'm saying there is a problem.
Well, wait a second. I mean, you described services performed for a manufacturing plant that competes with foreigners. That's a valid point. But they're talking about, restaurant workers, hotel workers, the growing number of people who do services for companies that tend to suburban lawns and stuff like that. That's the pure kind of, you might call that the pure service sector. You can't, that job cannot be shipped abroad.
But I don't understand what Drum's point. Drum's point is that so it doesn't matter how inefficient those services are performed?
No, but that's a separate argument. I mean, in other words...
Well, that's my argument.
Well, no, but there's two things, Mickey. There's a kind of inefficiency that can lead to the wholesale shipment of jobs abroad, and there's a kind of inefficiency that will have to be absorbed somewhere in your society. And might lead to even to a marginal reduction in the demand for services, just as the minimum wage may, but is not going to lead to the wholesale closing of plants and loss of industries. That's the distinction.
I don't know. We're in competition. If Kevin Drum wanted to pass a labor law that only applied to industries that weren't subject to foreign competition, that would be interesting. Unfortunately, the card check rule applies across the board.
Well, right, but a point Matt made was that...
Well, right, yeah, so, right. I mean, yeah, right. It's a big deal. Secondly, we're competing all around the world for, to have centers of excellence with universities and managers. And, if New York gets too expensive to live because the people in the restaurants... get paid so much. Not that I think this is on the verge of happening, but people in the restaurants get paid so much that you can't be a symbolic analyst in New York anymore. The symbolic analysts are going to move to
Tahiti?
No, they're going to move to Singapore.
Yeah.
Or someplace. I mean,
I constantly meet people who are wrestling with the question of whether to just move to Singapore because
there is a threat.
Because that cappuccino.
There is a threat. Well, the movie industry's all moved to Vancouver here. There's a symbolic analyst industry.
Well, that's because Canada subsidizes the movie industry.
No, it's because they don't have unions there, and the wages are cheaper.
Maybe it's both, but
the point is that at some point down the road, we can't just rest on our laurels and say, hey, well, we have all these symbolic analysts. We're going to be number one in the world in educated people. No, maybe one day we won't be number one in the world in educated people. Anyway, I'm not against raising the wages of unskilled workers. I just don't. I think the better way to do that is through a tight labor market. And Kevin Drum challenged me to come up with my plan. I put out my plan. And I think it's better than his plan.
Well, two of the three things...
Unionism will hurt low-wage workers. It won't help low-wage workers. It'll make everybody less efficient. It'll make wages sticky, so the Fed has to clamp down every time there's too much prosperity. A tight labor market is, raises all boats.
Well, yeah, but your three-point plan included continued economic growth. Yeah, like who's opposed to that? And universal health care, which I'm sure...
Well, wait a minute. Kevin Drum specifically denied that continuing economic growth was going to lead to rising wages at the low end, and it did in the late 90s, and it's starting to do it now. And economists like Frank Libby, who are good liberal Democrats, think that that's the best way to raise wages at the bottom, is to have a tight labor market. And I think they're right.
Well, that's a contentious issue at best. What has happened to income distribution? The final thing is...
I'm not saying that the income distribution is getting worse. I'm saying it got better in the late 90s, which Kevin admits. He just said it was a bubble. It was a bubble. But now we're rebuilding it on a more stable basis.
The final thing is, Matt said, and this may be true, is that, it's unlikely that workers in highly vulnerable industries are going to demand... vulnerable to foreign competition are going to demand things that would be fatal. But, I do think there's more awareness of that than there was when the auto industry perks got written in. But maybe not.
So we should... a much better way to... If we have to appease the unions, as everybody seems to want to do, a much better way to do it would be to insist on labor and environmental provisions as part of our trade agreement.
Interesting that you should say that. I almost forgot.
I had a feeling that might...
There was a big threshold. The Bush administration has come around on that very issue.
I didn't understand... There was an article in the New York Times about that. I didn't understand that article. It implied that they were coming around in a way that somehow was going to void the labor laws in the United States. I did not understand how that worked. Maybe somebody can explain it to me. The left is suspicious that they're not really coming around, that they're coming around in some sort of Trojan horse fashion that's going to wind up invalidating the Davis-Bacon Act. Not that would be...
Well, we'll link to that piece. I haven't read it in a few days, and I probably read it too hastily, but the lead was the Bush administration is now willing to have, labor accords be part of trade deals in principle, which would be a big breakthrough.
Well, that'd be a good thing. If they really are resisting even the provisions that Clinton agreed to, and they're now going back to the Clinton position, that'd be great. I agree. But the point is that labor doesn't want that. Labor wants the card check.
Labor does want that.
And so it's not this is the standard thing with liberals and special interests. The conventional wisdom is you have to resist their 10th demand. Only give them 5 of their 10 demands. You don't have to agree to everything. But the problem is the worst demand is the one they insist on the most. So the worst demand, the demand that teachers insist on is not being fired. The demand that unions insist on is sort of changing the playing field so that more firms are unionized. The demand that the Black Caucus insists on is affirmative action. It's always the core demand is the worst demand. It's not the most sensible.
Well, you're wrong to say labor does not want that. Labor does want that.
But it's not their...
Well, whatever. But they want it. The question has been, do they want it, sincerely? Do they want these trade deals with labor accords to go through, or are they hoping to sabotage the trade deals?
Well,
and I think more and more, and I think this may have been in this piece, but more and more people in labor are seriously saying, yeah, they could live with some trade deals if they had labor accords in them. I have long been saying that this is the best form of protection for labor in a globalizing economy.
That would be great if it were true. I defer to you.
Well, good. That's a welcome change.
On all issues involving trade.
So comments, we don't have much time left. I welcome the comments of a commenter who goes under the name in the comment section, at least, of Abu Nur al-Irlandi, because he seems to be quite familiar with Islam and the Quran, and every time you say something kind of half-baked, he seems capable of slapping your wrist in an extremely polite and civil way. Did you read that post?
I did not read that post. He slapped my wrist?
Yeah, very civilly. Almost in a way that well, never mind.
Why did you tell me what he said?
Well, it gets back to this thing where you were acting as if, and I went back and looked at the video. You did seem to be under the impression, based on something that you had heard some former Muslim say, that Muslims get up in the morning and pray for... Wait a second. That Muslims get up... Nikki, can I finish? That Muslims get up in the morning Did you interrupt me just now, or was it like me crazily saying, "Can I finish?" when you were not interrupting me?
You're crazily saying things, but I was just saying who the person was. It was Wafa Sultan.
Okay, fine. But what you were saying was you acted as if Muslims all over the world get up every day and pray for the death of Christians and Jews.
No, I was saying that this woman said that she, growing up in a Muslim country, did that, and I am not going to gainsay her eyewitness testimony.
That you definitely made it sound broader to that. We'll link to this, but you definitely were extrapolating from that, and I had to assert this is not part of standard Muslim practice.
I'm not. My point, it was standard Muslim practice where this woman grew up, and you can't, and that means something. All I'm saying is, my point about that is, I'm with you in terms of being for the, Islamic Reformation and thinking that it's no worse than Christianity, et cetera, et cetera. All I'm saying is, I think if a truly evil religion came along, you wouldn't recognize it. It's sort of like it's a by definition empty category in your worldview that there could not be a religion that was a bad religion that's not a religion of peace. And I don't trust you to tell me which religions are religions of peace and which are bad religions, because I think you have an overdetermined bias to saying, oh, everything's a religion of peace.
Can you name a religion that over time has not had both good and bad manifestations, and has not had both sustained good manifestations and sustained bad manifestations? Can you name one?
I'm not the expert in religion. No, but all I'm saying is I think we should be aware that maybe, Islam is a little less peaceful than other religions.
Well,
that's all.
If that's going to be your position, you should read up and get ready to stand behind it.
No, I'm just saying that my position is we should be the people who say that it's less peaceful might have a point. Why is that a crazy thing to say? I'm for Reza Asfad. I think, we should reinterpret the Quran and denature it and pacify it, and as part of the Marxist pacification of all religions in the pursuit of more prosperity, we should turn it into a religion of peace if it's not. But, let's be open to the possibility that it might be harder than we think.
In any event, this person, I may have been referring to him as a he, but that's, I guess, a supposition on my part. But a convenient one, and I'll continue to do that maybe, is genuinely at a loss to figure out what the hell you're talking about. And she seems quite conversant in Islam and the Quran. So it would be interesting, maybe you could ask this lady, what is she talking about? Where was it that she was, where she got up every day and prayed for the death of Christians and Jews? He has a speculation about
She said this. She was in Syria.
She was in Syria?
Yeah.
Okay, you might ask her what specific, like denomination or whatever. I mean, and it's not just a question of what place she's in, but, what tradition. Anyway, I'm glad that she is on the case, because then I can spend a little less time on it myself.
Well, I will go read that and I will respond.
It's related a little to this other issue I promised to get back to, and maybe we don't have time again, and maybe I'll just keep promising forever, but this issue of why conservatives seem less generically hospitable to the idea of root causes for bad behavior.
Could you say it quickly?
Can I say it quickly?
Yeah, why conservatives are... Yes.
Well, no, but from some comments a few weeks ago when we raised this, from looking at them, basically one person wrote in and said, it's not true that understanding the root causes, makes you more sympathetic. Because now, after we've invaded Iraq, I understand the Iraqis are just different from us, and so I don't sympathize with them, And somebody replied, well, yeah, but that's not an understanding of the actual causes of their behavior. And, let me ask you this. Do you understand why the position you're advancing about Islam is associated with the right wing, where religion is posited to be the explanation for the bad behavior? you're aware it tends to be a right-wing position, right?
Yeah, no, and it's not a position I'm advancing. I just think we should be open to it, and I think, it may have a germ of truth in it. That's all.
But do you see kind of why it logically fits into the right-wing paradigm?
Not quite. I mean, I see why it fits into the Christian paradigm. They think that, our religion is better than yours. Most people think their religion is better than
I maintain that the reason it does is precisely because it is not a root causes explanation. It doesn't make us look at the actual political, economic, social situation on the ground in search of things that might help. They're just like infested by evil spirits, right? Religion, is this ineradicable force
But that's not the neocon position. The neocon position is there are root causes underneath the religious attitudes, unemployment.
No, actually, they're kind of down on those kinds of explanations.
Not when the war started. The anti-democratic structures in Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Middle East, and that if people were only given jobs and democracy, the religion would change. It's a very Marxist viewpoint.
Did they emphasize jobs?
Sure, there was they constantly emphasized the mass of unemployed men in Saudi Arabia who, if there were democracy, they would have to be employed, and we'd have capitalism, and it'd be wonderful. I'm sure that I certainly heard neocons say that.
Well, I mean, the conjecture I had, and this is half-baked, but in trying to get to the bottom of this, because it is a fact that conservatives, when you start talking in those terms about root causes, they kind of don't like the generic term, and yet you're right that their explanations for this do imply some causal forces in the actual material world. My latest theory, I don't know about this, is that the forces they tend to favor tend to be things that make it not easy for you to really identify with the motivations of the people in question, right? Like if they say, well, the problem is they don't have democracy, that's kind of not easy really for me to wrap my mind around in a way, because I've always lived in a democracy. I mean, and even in the choice of words, if you compare a word like resentment with a word like humiliation, Bush said they resent our freedom. Resentment is kind of a negative thing. We don't like to think, none of us like to think of ourselves as resentful people, so you can't easily identify with someone who is said to resent something. But humiliation, I think we would all say, yeah, we felt humiliated at times. I suspect that it might be the case that if you went through and looked at left and right-wing explanations for root causes, you would find that the right favors the explanations and terminology that make it not all that easy to actually identify with the position of the people.
First, the democracy thing I completely disagree with. Everybody identifies with people who lived in Eastern Europe without democracy and yearned for the democracy and finally got it. Nobody says we don't sympathize with the Czechs because they were living in an undemocratic regime, and we sympathize with the Saudis who were living in an undemocratic regime. The humiliation thing, I mean, isn't it true that humiliation has a stronger and more peculiar role in Arab societies than in ours, and we have to figure out why that is, and I would look to the material, substructure as a good Marxist, but
no, I don't think so.
Don't really?
Well, I think different things are considered humiliating.
Do we kill? They have honor killings. We don't even whatever is humiliating. Our honor killing quotient is a whole lot lower than theirs.
Well, there is a distinction people make. I mean, that's a slightly different thing. I think there are things classified as honor cultures, and within America, the South is considered more of an honor culture than the North, at least in tradition. I don't think that's
not as much of an honor culture as Afghanistan.
Yeah, but I mean, a good example. Well, we've gone on a while, but I remember General Sanchez. I mean, I remember when we went into Iraq. And I saw that we were in search of insurgents. Soldiers were, like banging down doors, just as they kind of suspected somebody, or at least demanding to be let in. Then they would pull out the husband, put him on his knees, tie him up, and put a sack over his head while his family was watching. And we would bring along reporters to videotape that so it could be broadcast on Iraqi TV. And after a couple of months of this, General Sanchez said, well, we've learned that apparently in this culture, this kind of treatment is considered humiliating. I mean, there is no culture in which a man being humiliated in the eyes of his family is not an incendiary thing. And that isn't... You look, you're right, there are cultural differences. But, I don't know, there is a certain obliviousness in some sectors to things that really we are just like them, and all you have to do is ponder that a while.
But the question is there an independent religious factor? Everybody agrees that there are these Marxist sub-factors of jobs and democracy and et cetera, and family structure. But the question is there something in the Koran that makes it a bit worse? And, I'm convinced that eventually the non-zero-sum bargains to be had will wipe away whatever difficulties the Koran independently presents. But I'm not willing to rule out a priori that maybe the Koran's a little more difficult. And it seems to me you are ruling it out a priori.
Well, first of all, most Muslims in the world recite the Quran in a language they don't understand because they recite it in Arabic and don't speak Arabic. But I would say there's plenty of inspiration for violence in the Bible and in the Quran. And the main question is do the circumstances of your life encourage you to draw on it?
I agree that's the main question. I don't think it's the only question. Yeah,
well, I could elaborate. I think you're exaggerating the difference between the nature of the scriptures, but...
Well, good. You can elaborate...
some other time.
Perhaps in future episodes.
So this was not a very lighthearted dialogue. Now, I blame your friend Ann Coulter. I've got to say, would you tell her just to shut the hell up so we won't have to have any more of these arguments? And, really, if you are her friend, Mickey, would you advise her that this is actually not in her interest, just as I'm actually advising you that it's not in your interest to be her friend?
I'll think about it. She thinks it's... she was on Hannity and thought it was in her interest. She said, it's never hurt me before. It's not going to hurt me now.
No, but 5 years ago, there were right-wing bloggers who supported her. Now there are basically none. She's slowly losing her constituency. Increasingly, you're all that's left. In any event, I would say that, Lisa, my wife, said, oh, God, you're going to talk about that. It's exactly what she wants. When she saw the video, she said, this is obviously a calculated attempt to get attention. And it obviously is. And that's why conservatives are bailing out on her. They because they know, she's going to get attention. B, it's bad for them. I think the only question for liberals, I think there's so many, the conservatives have so thoroughly deserted her, the influential, thoughtful conservatives, that now the question is, do liberals want to keep her alive by continuing to get outraged? And the only reason would be a strategic one, that namely, she is so bad for conservatism that, keep her alive as a symbol to stigmatize conservatism.
The problem is that I think she's a closet reasonable, and so if you're closet reasonable, it's very easy to be extreme, and then tone it down and get a lot of good press. So she always has that move available to her.
No, she's losing it. She's losing it. There are more and more blogs that are just not going to give her.
She hasn't done that move, but all I'm saying is keeping her alive as a sort of Michael Moore is dangerous for the left because she can always, at some point suddenly become reasonable. That's the follow-up principle. If you're extreme and then reasonable, you're famous. If you're reasonable all the way to begin with, you're never famous. And
she's now unequivocally an asset for the left, and that's the only reason. My instinct is to just don't react to her, don't give her the satisfaction. On the other hand, I think she has now officially become an asset for the left.
Well, I'm not going to dispute that.
Well, okay.
But the question is, she.
Are you going to tell her that she's an asset for the left?
That's a good question. Maybe I'll play her this tape.
I'll tell you what. Why don't we put this to an end, and you just go send that email to her, okay?
I always follow orders, Bob.
That's why we keep you here, Mickey.
You have a sort of Manchurian influence over me. Whatever you say, you're the finest American I've ever known.
Thank you.
See you later.
Okay. See you around.